Well, the college football landscape went through another big shift a week ago with the announcement that USC and UCLA will be moving from the Pac-12 to the Big Ten for the 2024 season. The two flagship programs for the Pac-12 unanimously admitted when conference presidents and chancellors held a vote on the addition of the two schools last Thursday. The move has put the Pac-12 on life support with the vultures circling. There's talk the Big 12 could pick off up to 6 teams from the conference. There's also talk of perhaps a merger with the Big 12 or ACC to form a super conference. All we know right now is USC and UCLA will be moving to the Big 10. Adding the two schools will bring the Big 10 to 16 teams. That equals the number of schools set to be in the SEC once Texas and Oklahoma join the conference from the Big 12 in 2025. All right, let's get into these tectonic shifts that are occurring within the game with college football writer Barrett Sallee. Barrett, before we came on, you and I were talking about, you were saying that you almost want the season to start at this point.
Yeah, it'll give us a break, right? There's structure during the college football season. Now there's no structure. Like, honestly, Jeremy, by the time you started this segment, there might be 3 teams that have already moved on somewhere else. It's just crazy chaos, and it's not gonna let up. We thought it would stop last year after everything sorted itself out, but now you have so many more moving parts. These realignment talks are going to last for probably 3-4 years.
Yeah, I've got the alerts ready to go on the phone and the laptop right next to me, just in case something does happen. Barrett, one thing about the USC-UCLA move in particular, let's start there with that shift, is it's unique because it creates the first super conference, constructed largely without regard for geography. So with that in mind, what challenges lie ahead for both USC and UCLA in making that shift to the Big Ten?
Well, first things first, I feel really, really bad for the equipment truck drivers because they're never going to be at home during the college football season except on home weekends. But yeah, I think for football, I mean, look, you're going to deal with it. You're making so much money. These players are used to traveling on planes. It's the weekend, so it's not necessarily a huge deal. I do feel bad, though, for the non-revenue sports, because playing a basketball game across the country on a Tuesday night, you're basically asking student athletes to become students on airplanes with airplane Wi-Fi. That's very hard to do, especially in sports where you're not making a lot of revenue. So for football, I think it'll be fine. It'll be in a little bit of an annoyance, but is there really that much of a difference between a 4-hour flight and a 3-hour flight? Not really, especially for young people. So I think from a football perspective, it's not going to be a big deal. But for the other sports, yeah, it's going to be a massive problem. It's going to be a huge headache.
What challenges does it present for the Big Ten then? Let's take a look at that other side, because USC and UCLA, yes, there's going to be a lot more traveling, but at the same time, those other Big Ten teams are going to be coming the other way. So what challenges does it present for the Big Ten teams?
Yeah, 1 off across the country, 2 off across the country, not a big deal. But I think what really interests me about this is if you're a Big Ten school, you're basically getting access to UCLA and USC. You're getting access to the Southern California recruiting landscape. But conversely, USC and UCLA are going to be all up in your neighborhood at all times. So I think from a recruiting aspect, the Big Ten is in an odd situation because UCLA is going to get a lot of players from the Midwest. It's a desirable place. The campus is beautiful. It's in LA. So those lesser tier schools, the middle tier schools, are going to have to deal with something that they haven't dealt with in a very long time. Not only location of these schools, but the amount of money they're willing to shell out, because that's going to be equal to or even greater than what some of these Big Ten schools are shelling out, like Ohio State and like Michigan.
As we are all well aware, this isn't necessarily about competition. It's getting a larger piece of that broadcast monetary pie. USC and UCLA moving to the Big Ten could garner them almost $70 million more per year in broadcast rights money. Now, the Pac-12 has their deal up in 2024. How important is it for them to get a new deal in place, and what would that look like considering these two defections?
Well, it's very important because then you could lock whatever schools you have left as well as whatever you have coming in. Not necessarily long-term, because I would have a hard time imagining any broadcast partner will do a long-term deal with the Pac-12 based on what's going on. But I think it does make it interesting from a streaming side, an Apple Plus, a Netflix, an Amazon, things like that I think are going to jump in this more because they know that live Sports are the best way to keep customers with advertisers. That's the only way, really, in this day and age, that you can go directly to the consumer and be comfortable with your investment. So I think from a broadcast partner perspective, they've been through this song and dance before. It's going to be really hard for them to do this. It's a great way, though, if you're one of these streaming services, to have an exclusive partnership with the Pac-12 for 1, 2, maybe 3 games per week, with everything else on the Pac-12 network. So I think it's very important that the Pac-12 finds something. The problem is I don't think it's going to be through a traditional partner, just because they know that this conference, as it stands right now, or if it adds a Boise State or a Colorado State or San Diego State or whatever, is just not necessarily attractive on a week-to-week basis.
I'm just curious, Barrett, as to if you're a broadcast provider and you're looking to make a deal with the Pac-12 and they're looking at possibly losing 4, 6 teams to the Big 12 or going with the ACC to form a super conference, how do you negotiate those rights? Or would you expect nothing less than like a 2 to 3 year deal at this point?
You absolutely. I mean, if you're a broadcast partner, why would you go long term with a 10-year deal, especially knowing right now, and we've heard the reports, Dennis Dodd reported it a couple days ago, that the Big Ten is waiting around for Notre Dame's decision. So in 2-3 years, whenever Notre Dame decides to do whatever it decides to do, could the Big Ten start picking off Oregon, Washington, the Arizona schools, whoever? And a TV partner is not going to want to deal with all that, especially considering it is pretty much guaranteed that it's going to any move is going to devalue the Pac-12, whether it's a huge devaluation or just a small one. So, yeah, I don't see them getting involved in a long-term deal with the Pac-12. I don't think it makes financial sense.
Might be a few pages of contingencies in some of those deals. All right.
Yeah.
As
well,
we mentioned,
billable hours are always undefeated, Jeremy. You know how it goes. Billable hours, those lawyers are going to get their money.
Absolutely right. As we mentioned, I mean, other conferences would be interested in either picking off some of their teams or working to form an alliance. Barrett, let's talk about that. What would an alliance between the Pac-12 and the ACC look like at this point?
You said the A word, because the alliance worked so well last time. They did that this time last year. I think the alliance talk between the Pac-12 and the ACC, the Pac-12 wants it, it needs it. It's one of the best bad ideas that exists, which if you're the Pac-12, that's what you're kind of searching for at this point, the best bad idea. But I don't see any reason why the ACC would want to do that. In fact, I've heard the ACC kind of scoff at that behind closed doors, that all of this talk is coming on the Pac-12 side. So when you're looking at this alliance, okay, is it a scheduling alliance with the ACC? Well, the ACC already has one with Notre Dame. 4 ACC schools have interstate rivalries with SEC schools. So how do you work a Pac-12 alliance in there? I don't see how that would work, because from the ACC's perspective, do you really need to go out west and play, Arizona State? Do you need to go play Stanford? No, you really don't, especially if the membership stays where it is right now. So I think that's coming from the Pac-12 side. I think if they were to somehow get that deal done, it would be 2-3 games per year in ACC country, the ACC going over 2-3 games per year over there. Anything more than that, like a Notre Dame style affiliation with what Notre Dame has right now with the ACC, I just don't see how it benefits the conference in an ACC that is not necessarily on life support, but it's kind of looking around going, ooh, who's coming? Who's coming? Who's coming from my Florida State? Who's coming from my North Carolina? So I don't see how it makes sense for the ACC.
Well, the Big 12, I mean, they know what the Pac-12 are going through. They lost Texas and Oklahoma to the SEC a year ago. I mean, they're reportedly opened up to half a dozen teams in the Pac-12 joining them. What's the latest on the Big 12 and their plans to expand?
Yeah, they're certainly going to be the aggressor, and all the Big 12 has to do, even though the commissioners have changed, the presidents and ADs, by and large, have stayed the same from last year. So all they got to do is go to that bookshelf and see, oh, realignment. We have that one down. We know exactly what to expect after the last 10, 15 years. The Pac-12 doesn't have that. So, yeah, they're going to be aggressors. And let's think about what the 6 teams are that they might consider. Arizona State, Colorado, Utah, Oregon, Washington. You put those 6 teams in the Big 12 with what they're getting in UCF, Cincinnati, Houston, and BYU, you're basically putting an X across the entire country with your conference membership. That's a really attractive conference. I think we all look at the Big 12 and think, oh, it's going to die with Texas and Oklahoma. Certainly, it's devalued a little bit. But if you go from the Pacific Northwest to the Sunshine State, and from the Southwest all the way out to Cincinnati and West Virginia, that's attractive. advertisers are going to love that. So I think the Big 12 is in a really good spot if it makes the right moves right now, if it can lure, say, Washington and Oregon, who might be waiting around for the Big 10. But if they can say, hey, look, we're going to have a super conference that's going to be nationwide, you're still going to make a ton of money, certainly more than you're going to have in the Pac-12, then I think that is something that the more the presidents and ADs of the Big 12, because they're going to be advising more than anything else to this, would be not only would be acceptable to them, but would be advantageous and a huge gain in all these realignment talks.
Funny how things changed in the course of 11 plus months. 11 plus months, we were talking Big 12 demise. Now look at them. All right, lastly, the SEC has just been able to sit back, relax, and just, wait for schools to come knocking on their door. What's the next move for the SEC at this point?
Sit back and wait and chill in the Birmingham office and maybe go get some barbecue, because I think the SEC right now, sure, every conference has had a standing invitation for Notre Dame for 20 years, right? Like that always exists. It's not going to happen for the SEC, obviously. So why does it have to be proactive? What could it be proactive with? Going to Arizona, get the Arizona schools, going to Oregon and Washington? Okay, yeah, but that's more of okay, we have to expand for the sake of expanding mood, not you're going to bring a ton of value to our current membership. So I think the SEC has its plan. If they can figure out a way to get the ACC teams out of that conference, Clemson, Florida State, North Carolina, whoever, okay, yeah, I just don't see how, from a television partner standpoint, how the television partners for both those conferences would feel about that. So I think the SEC is perfectly fine in wait-and-see mode. It knows the ACC schools that it could target are still going to be there regardless. And if it has to go nationwide just for the sake of expanding, okay, but they don't really care at this point. Everybody I've talked to around the SEC is like, all right, if Notre Dame wants to come, cool. If not, we're fine.
He is CBS Sports college football writer Barrett Sallee, joining us to discuss the ever-changing landscape in college football. Thanks, Barrett. Now I'm hungry for barbecue, too, by the way. I still have a bit of the show left to do. For more on the goings-on and what the future could look like, be sure to check out the Cover 3 podcast. Chip Patterson, Tom Fornelli, the latest episode discussing last week's Big 10 expansion and what could be next for both the Pac-12 and the Big 12. Chip and Tom spent just over an hour discussing all of that with Danny Cannell. You can download and follow the Cover 3 wherever you get your favorite podcast.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.